Thank you for taking the time to join us today, Baba Saladin Muhammad. How are you?
I'm doing okay. Thanks.
Good. Um, we have a wide audience and a very large audience. And once we get into the conversation, I'm sure you'll be familiar with, you will be familiar to a lot of the people who listen to this particular program. But for the benefit of those who are being introduced to you at this particular moment in this particular conversation, could you just give us a little bit of a short bio, or short as long as you want, of who Baba Saladin Muhammad is?
Well, uh, um, I was born in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. My mother is from the Rocky Mountain, North Carolina area. Is how I really got got to North Carolina. I guess I've been active, pretty active, consciously active since '65. Actually, I was not so proud of admitting I was in the military, and I was in Dominican Republic, Santo Domingo, and I pretty much got politicized there. Woke up exposed to contradictions of U.S. society, uh, colonization, imperialist aggression in a country, where black people uh, were very significant, a majority, in fact. And I got out of the military in '66, um, got married in '66, and went to work for Philco Ford, making television for about almost 7 years in a big plant in Philadelphia. Became pretty active in the Black Liberation Movement. Um, that shaped my thinking about U.S. society and about the world. In fact, number of activities in Philadelphia that were pretty noted activities that I participated in. Initially, I wasn't. I was in a trade union, but I wasn't a trade unionist at that time. I was a Black liberation activist. But probably around 1970, around 74, 75, began to be more associated with the labor movement, and we formed the organization called the Black Workers Support Committee in around 1975. Earlier, I had been a part of a section of the Revolutionary Action Movement called the Black Guards, and that that really molded my political uh, and ideological thinking. And after a series of activities in the organization called the African People's Party, which was an outgrowth of the Revolutionary Action Movement, found myself connected to national frameworks. I attended the 1967 Black Power Conference in Newark, New Jersey, and the '68 Black Power Conference in Philadelphia. Was involved in both of them, mainly as a young activist, learning and meeting people, and coming back, to local work, having a bigger picture of what the local work, was connected to. Um, then in the 70, this was 72, 71, maybe 71 or 72, uh, was a part of the first mobilization of the African Liberation Day coalition movement. At that time, probably met, well, did meet, but still young, listening, uh, a meeting with Walter Rodney and a few others. Again, listening. I'm not even sure whether I asked the question at that meeting or not, but he was talking to us about the Sixth Pan-African Congress that was scheduled to be held, and what we might expect. And it was very, very good to hear him. He was grounded. His terms, were not uh, unreachable, and so I felt, generally pretty comfortable. At that meeting was a brother named Owusu Sadaki, uh, Nelson Johnson, uh, who's from Greensboro, Max Stanford, Muhammad Ahmed, brother named Jalali. I think that was probably about it.
Yeah, interestingly enough, you actually gave so many points of entry, so many points that we can actually, go off in this conversation. And I want to try to go down a number of these paths that you just laid out. I must make sure that everyone understands that this was a very brief, recollection on your part of the many types of formations that you were involved with. You mentioned RAM, the Revolutionary Action Movement, and you mentioned Muhammad Ahmed, but I want to back up for a second, and I want to talk about the transition from one particular point, particularly with your name, from one particular point in your life, and having a name that was given to you by your family, by your mother, but then moving into Saladin Muhammad. Because the reason why I think that that is important to really talk about that is because we know that that evolutionary period also developed in the context of a consciousness, a critical consciousness level raising, a critical consciousness in the context of raising, because we could talk about, Malcolm Little to Malcolm X to Malik El Haj Shabazz, right? So then what is it that propelled you, or how did your transition and from literally you self-naming, are you being able to identify yourself and then articulate that not only with your actions and your theoretical and intellectual formations, but also in the context of you being able to name yourself?
Well, around 65, 66, our kind of ideological leader was Malcolm X. And many of us followed Malcolm culturally, politically, and some religiously. I uh, I took what's called Shahada, Kalima Shahada, which is many would be associate that with being baptized. Um, I think my Kalima was in 1970, but um, I became Saladin around that time, even though politically I started following uh, the teachers of Malcolm and also was being mentored by Muhammad Ahmed, Max Stanford, as early as 67. Uh, it's really kind of interesting. I was in better shape than I am now. Uh, I was a martial artist. Started training in 67, but probably, hand-to-hand combat in the military as early as 63, you know. So, but um, the Asian martial arts in 67, and Max Stanford, he came to the dojo, and many of the young people were training that were part of the Black Guards, and he handed me a whole stack of Black Guard manuals and said, organize the guard, you know, and I did, you know, organize a unit of the Black Guards, and became pretty pretty active. Helped to organize a, uh, a student demonstration, high school student demonstration. Of course, I was out of high school, but this was the November 17th, 1967, a march on the Board of Education. And it was a massive march, probably between 7 and 10,000 students. Uh, Rizzo was the police commissioner. Frank Rizzo was the police commissioner at that time, and he, let the police loose. And we were young and training, and uh, a lot of us young people saw this as an opportunity to test our training, you know, uh, and some of us got arrested and that kind of thing. That was uh, then this had occurred, I think, right after the '67 Black Power Conference in Newark. So it was one of the early kind of uprisings, students in high school and some junior high school that occurred, and we started to see other such uprisings develop across the country. '68, those. So I my awakening to 1967 was also the Detroit Rebellion, and elements of RAM were in Detroit at that time. So my awakening was during a period of rebellion, Black rebellion. So my understanding of what being a revolutionary was or meant was largely shaped by that. Um, Robert Williams was also, by way of RAM, a part of what was shaping our thinking. And it pretty early on, even though at that time we were developing as nationalists and pretty much revolutionary nationalists, uh, Rob's relationship to RAM and Malcolm's experience began to shape a kind of internationalism for me and others, you know, that was relating to.
Before we get into that development of a clear internationalist perspective, I wanted to back up just a few steps here because I wrote down in my notes here, of course, Robert F. Williams, particularly when you mentioned the notion of being radicalized or seeing firsthand U.S. imperialism by way of the military service that you had, and I'm also thinking about other folk here, just Jack Odell, um, and one of the things that I'm also seeing here is this common denominator in the middle of all of this is a certain level of activism, being exposed to the contradictions in a capitalist system and also how it constructs society and the question of labor. And of course, this leads you to, and you mentioned this in your brief outline earlier, that you was involved or organizing before trade unionism. And I know that a lot of work that you have done is to really kind of expose a number of the contradictions of racism and unionism in the context of the activism that Black workers have been engaged in, consistently. Could you talk a little bit about because I definitely want to get to the internationalism because you mentioned, of course, Muhammad Ahmed, you mentioned, Robert F. Williams. Could you talk a little bit about that in the center of this, you know, the question of labor? What was that question as you were developing that in your activism as a young person? And as you start to move forward, at the center, at the center of your life's work is really to expose those contradictions that we find in labor movements and its entry into unionism. Could you talk a little bit about the ideas there that Robert F. Williams and other people kind of, helped you kind of solidify as you're moving forward? And of course, Muhammad Ahmed with RAM, institutionalizing you guys, institutionalizing and capturing the energy of you young folk who are really rebelling against a nation state and the way that it treats people, not only here in the United States, but also across the world.
Well, I was in the I was in a trade union when I worked at Philco Ford. Uh, I would occasionally attend trade union meetings, but wasn't really a trade union activist. I do remember one experience, which kind of it was an enlightening experience. It took me a little time to really understand it. This supervisor, I worked on a line where the chassis of the televisions were were put together, and this supervisor, white guy, really wasn't much older than myself. I used to wear dashiki to work, and I was a drummer, kunga drummer at that time. So I would bring my drum to work in a duffel bag and had to leave it downstairs with the guards. But I had my dashiki on, and as I would, come to work, and again, young and uh, uh, you know, remembering, the quotes from Malcolm and others, you know, uh, this Ray guy's name was Ray Golly. He was the supervisor. He would stand next to my position where I was working at, and he would make all kinds of, kind of comments, you know, uh, to somebody else, or just loud enough for me to hear, you know. I mean, he said something about Malcolm X and Stokely Carmichael at that time, before Kwame Ture, before that name changed, and I would sit there and, you know, uh, I remember one time missing uh, my task on the chassis, and it was on the assembly line, so it just went by me because this guy, you know, I was, listening to him and, thrown off by him. Then he chewed me out. You understand? What are you doing? You're supposed to be working. You're not getting paid for nothing. That kind of thing. Like setting me up. And one time he kind of did this, and I rose up. You understand? I challenged him. You know, and I got suspended. Uh, and I know I came back to work a week later, a week suspension, and he tried to do it again. I rose up, and this white woman, old white woman, she was clearly one of the Slavic countries. You can hear the draw in her, and I'm talking about she probably was. I don't know if she was 5 feet tall. She could have been 5'1" or 5'4", 11". She was a steward, and she came over and says, what do you think you're doing, Golly? Call him Golly, Ray Golly. What do you think you're doing, Golly? Leave that work alone. You know, uh, you go and you supervise, he work, and backed him up. You understand? Damn, to myself, And she says, you all right, son? That kind of thing. Yeah. I said, yeah, all right, I'm all right, thanks. Now my father, he was he was in the trade union. He worked at the Philadelphia Navy Yard for about 35 years, you know. Uh, but he was a hard worker, and paid his dues, and he had good things to say about the union. But he was a union member. He wasn't necessarily an activist per se. So I saw this, and so I started going to union meetings, after that experience, and more listening and learning. Still not yet an activist or leader, but became pro-union, in that experience. I later on saw that there was a contradiction between the workers and the bosses, and that at least in my experience and experiences after that, some workers were not going to let the boss get away with, you know, shop stewards were not going to let the boss get away with just exercising, this kind of power, this domination over workers. It was like, whether I like that boy or not, he's a part of the union, and we're gonna fight you. We're gonna challenge you on that. That was my generally experience. Inside. Now you had there was a difference between the upper crust of the bureaucracy and many of the stewards that were on the floor, because they were workers on the floor. And sometimes it's hard to see these distinctions. It was hard to see these distinctions because there was collaboration during my period, and you find them in some instances today. Stewards, no matter how long they worked there, they had what was called super seniority, which meant that during periods of layoffs, they, even though they had less time than other workers who were getting laid off, they didn't get laid off because they had super seniority. And you had some workers who became stewards, for that reason. Uh, During my time, I can't remember any black shop stewards at that time. You know, so this was 66 to around 71, maybe early 72, 71 probably. Yeah. In 70, when I got laid off, started working a few different places. I had a family. I just had our first son was born in late 66. So I still had to work, but I at that time I had access to what they call a GI loan. And the GI loan would cover you going to school. Well, I hadn't graduated from high school when I went in the army, so I did use the GI loan to go to school for a GED, and that was enough to provide some contribution for my family. I don't know whether I'm getting to
No,
say.
no. Actually, what's going on here is that you've done so much that things are running together at this particular point. Um, this is a very important period here too, because what I'm seeing as well, because one of the things that I think is important that I want to kind of tease out in your response just now is that at the same time that this is going on, and you mentioned becoming consciously active, in this 60 and 65 period, but you also, again, your consciousness and your intellectual formations are being developed as well. For those of us who understand the idea that an intellectual is not somebody that just has letters behind their name, because I'm definitely one of those particular people. This is an important period in you developing, because you're going to work with dashikis and leaving your conga drum down at the at the at the security desk, right? So I think that that's important as well. So there's a level of consciousness development that you're engaged in, specifically through your work with the revolutionary action movement. Am I correct in kind of assessing that particular period? Because you guys are not only organizing, right, but you're also engaged in political education.
I mean, again, the African People's Party, was outgrowth, and I became very, very active. But see, in 66, 67, many of us were a part of study groups or, liberation schools. And this was also during the early period of the fight for Black studies, Black history in the school, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So some of us, people who were a part of the African People's Party, the outgrowth of RAM, were in study groups with people who had begun to be teachers in some universities very early on, in the universities. So we were receiving, I don't know whether one would say courses or what, but we were studying pamphlets, books. Uh, some of us learned public speaking, how to put a leaflet together that we pass out, those things. And so that's where my education really came from. Malcolm said, "Travel broadens the scope," you know. And so, I met people like James Boggs, Jimmy, we called him, and Grace. This was in the '60s. These were people who Muhammad Ahmed, Max Stanford was very close to, and by way of him being with him, I met them. Activists who were part of the League of Revolutionary Black Workers out of Detroit, and so it was interaction with these forces. Many of us working in the plant, studying Marxism, studying history, and for a number of us, our ideas that came from our engagement in the movement, and that was how we grew. I remember I've, I've probably told this story one or two times. I had written a paper or something. It was on the National Independent Black Political Party, NBIP, and there was a meeting in Michigan. I don't know if it's Lansing. It was one of the universities there, and a number of us was there. And Manning Marble was there, and I really didn't know Manning, and I may have heard of his name, etc. But there was a table where people who had papers, they would just lay them down, So I'm across the room, and I heard somebody says, "Who is Saladin Muhammad?" That was Manning. He had picked it, was reading, And the first thing he asked me, he said, "What school did you go to, brother?" I said, "What school? What do you mean?" He said, "Well, yeah, I'm reading your paper." I said, "Well, I guess the movement was the school that I went to." And I remember that story, that experience, because again, there's always some assumption about where people learn at, where they get their information from, and what's legitimate and what's not legitimate information. And when I said that, he smiled. He didn't say anything else, but you wonder sometimes whether whether there's whether one continues to be impressed or, you know or not, after they asked that question from the very, very beginning, but there's a lot of us, uh, with this kind of experience that we've had to really learn, and particularly, those of us who didn't have the opportunity, or that wasn't necessarily part of our past, to go to school. I wish I wouldn't be able to go to school, but don't have. I got children who carried that part out for me, but a lot of young people, uh, 66, 67, probably up to maybe even up to around 70, 73 or so, was shaped by the movement, and that having a sense of history helps us to see, that they're the term organic intellectuals, or those kinds of things. So, in my experience.
And that experience is a very important experience to not only document but also to kind of use as a framework or a tool of analysis to understanding where we're at today, particularly in the context of whether it's Black studies or institutionalized knowledge development, but also its access. So what obviously what is important here is in this particular period, the question around access also revolved around questions of power, right? So you guys are developing a framework. You're having conversations and thinking with James and Grace Lee Boggs and the League of Revolutionary Black Workers. Talk a little bit more about the notion of ideas that you guys were developing was also very, very integral to shaping your experiences or engagement with what you call what you term to be the movement.
You know, probably, there was a couple of levels. Uh, Probably the 66, 67, up through the around the 1970 levels. My work was mainly local work. You get exposed nationally. I attended the 1969 Black Economic Development Conference in Detroit. This is when Jim Foreman, uh, one of the leaders of SNCC, James Foreman, um, made the call for reparations. Him and Lucius Walker from IFCO and those elements. But I was bringing back these experiences to local work, to the a group that we had formed initially called the Young Afro Americans in '66, and we changed the name to the Young African Nation. And this was beginning to develop an understanding of African Americans in the U.S. and particularly in the South as being an oppressed nation, you know. And so we changed from Young Afro Americans to Young African Nation. And so my travels and participation, again, more learning as opposed to uh, playing any significant role, in the Black Power conferences and the Black Economic Development Conference, and begin to bring this thinking back to a community in North Philly that I grew up in, projects called the Richard Allen Projects in North Philly, uh, and and there was a small cadre. We had organized a center, had a freedom center right next to the projects, and was able to. I remember in '69 we brought Sun Ra on our block, and people was like, wow, Sun Ra was not only he had some kind of look, some kind of gadget uh, that he had his piano and stuff on that it just spinned around like a merry-go-round, and had had the other instrumentalists, looking like angels with wings and everything. Now this was right at the projects. I mean, people just couldn't believe it. You know, couldn't couldn't believe it. It's like, well, what, how did this happen? Where did the resources come from? Wasn't no Sunrise. We was able to get him to come. It wasn't, no cost or anything, but it was like being exposed to things, because of travel and relationships that you build, or you were able to enter into. It brought, some thinking that just, being, in the projects where we grew up at, wouldn't have happened all by itself, and at that time, I didn't see. I mean, I saw this is something that freedom fighters did. Confidence that some of the young people and some of the parents. I was a parent, but I mean, I'm talking about older than I was. Begin to have things that they're able to talk about. Uh, Start to see the relationship between the local and the national, and how important it is, to developing a worldview or developing a national, those kinds of things. And a few things happened. We were young, around 1970. Uh, the drugs had been brought into the community. Clearly, became evident by the state. It was. I mean, this was a place that I and others had grew up in and seen some good times. My mother was kind of active person. They call her the hot dog lady. They used to have talent shows at the playground, and my mother would make hot dogs, and people would sing and perform, and she was active person. And so when you start to see, the decay and the infighting, among people who was in the same community, et cetera, it was really hurtful for some of us. And so in 1970, we had started agitating against the drug pushers, went out and this and that. And yeah, I remember there was some Democratic ward leader, and it was some kind of, he had been a ward leader for 38 years, and people wanted to get him out. And I remember we went through the community with bullhorns, talk about get him out. And right there, the dope pushers was around there, and uh, turned the bullhorn down with the politicians and the pushers too. Turned it right into that, and the pushers too, and I said, it was at night, and I remember saying, how many people want these drugs out of the community? You know, turn your lights off. The lights in people's houses, apartments start going off. You know, and boy, that did something to us. You understand, to see this expression of real support. You understand, and being tired. And right then we tried to build a united front. Representatives of the Black Panther Party, Philly Black Panther Party, representatives of the Republic of New Africa, and representatives. They were Simbas. They were connected to Karinga, Ryan Karinga. In Philly, there was a group that was a chapter or something of them. So we met at this Freedom Center, they called it the Black House that we had, and we had decided that we were going to we were going to go to this area, and we want to wage a struggle. When that day came, we waiting. It was only a small unit of the Black Guards, the Black Panther Party. Their representatives was at the location selling papers, free, because Bobby Seale was in jail. Free Bobby, they and the guy, from the Simbas, they didn't show up, and a couple people from the Republic, they didn't show up at all. So it was just essentially us from the Young African Nation. That was the new wing of the Black Guards that we had formed, and went out, and things happened. We were young. We were young. We walked just a couple blocks down to the projects from what you call, and we were we were equipped, as we went through, and had the bullhorn. Didn't have didn't have an exit strategy. Didn't have nothing at all. Just we 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 went, and dashikis and instruments under the dashikis, and everything. And before we got there, this young brother, he was about he was probably about 13 or something. He came up with a bike. He says, "Look," he says, "somebody's waiting up in a 4-story building with a rifle. You know, was waiting for us." So came around and said, "Aim up at the 4-story building." Either looked like the window closed or something, and the person like this disappeared, this and that, and then all hell kind of broke out. And I remember, at least I'm reminded of constantly, as we were running, this older sister says, "Come up, come up, come up, come up, come up." Told me and this other brother to come up into her apartment. She saved us, actually. She saved us from either being arrested or being killed at that time. You know, and uh, uh, but it's you build relationships with people, and these kinds of things, and they show themselves later on in some critical moments. Show themselves, and I remember us running back up towards the Black House. And this brother, who was a postal worker named Bubby, I never forget it. I think he's transitioned on. He had a Volkswagen, and he says, "This is the best I can do." And uh, me and this other brother, who was had just left out of this lady's house, and a couple of other brothers who had scattered and came back to the Black House. It seemed like about 7 of us got into 7 to 8 of us got into the Volkswagen, little Volkswagen. And he drove us away. Again, Bubby, he was a good cat, work who wasn't involved, but it was a moment, you understand, that he felt that he could do something, and we got away. And the first time I wrote something, aside from a leaflet or some notes or something, uh, myself and my wife, we had 2 children then, son and a daughter, who was 2 and 4. We had to leave, and we were in a location that had a potbelly stove, literally up in the mountains, up in Colorado somewhere. And I wrote something called The Making of a Black Revolutionary. And this was before James Forman wrote Making of a Black Revolutionary. I wrote this in 1970, handwritten, me and my partner, really interesting. It probably was about 20 pages or something, handwritten pages or something, and you find your way back traveling around and searching for people, this and that. But I mean, that was an experience, an exile experience. I was relatively young. I guess I was probably around 25 or something, 24, 25, 1970. And these friends, middle class forces, real progressive elements. They got us out, got a plane, this and that, and we was gone. Didn't know where we was going at, and wound up in Denver. And then they took us to a mountain location, and interesting, very, very, very interesting location. And I mean, at that time, you have an experience of having to flee. You understand, and then to gain an appreciation of a network of contacts that I didn't create. You know, uh, I was connected to by virtue of my connections. With RAM, and the African People's Party and that kind of thing. So you start to really have an appreciation of being part of a movement. That you're able to get out, and that kind of thing. Because you know the um, so again, you come back. I come right back into the same area. And I remember coming right back, and people looked at me like, people from the neighborhoods, like their eyes was popped out, like, what are you doing? That kind of thing. You came back and was welcome back, but you see people want change, but even though they were frightened, they were fearful. And so again, you gain an appreciation for what being in a movement, what a network is, what an infrastructure to be able to, you know, of a movement is. And once you know, you sit down or you're forced to sit down to think about those kind of things. And my children, you know, oh boy, they know the names of people, unlike today, where every conference, you understand, the hotels are filled up or this and that. We would go to meetings, we sleep on each other on the floor or somebody's couch, or they had a bedroom, etc. And the first time I slept in a hotel to be at a conference was the 1972 National Black Political Assembly in Gary, Indiana. Anna. And it was probably probably 8 or 10 of us was in one of the hotel rooms by himself, you know. So but today, everybody got to have a hotel room, and that kind of thing. And the children, you know, people say, "Oh, that's Muhammad Ahmed. That's so." Children know him, because those that kind of contact. The movement wasn't a distance from our homes. So I mean, I got it kind of molding and shaping.
No, Baba, I definitely wanted to chime in here because that's you're talking about that space in between spaces that we talk about. So the space of creating or institutionalizing, um, a movement and having the infrastructure, but also there's these spaces in between that you're talking about here, coming into contact with folk that other people may, look at in a certain level of regard, but they're also people that are just around and also living, also, maybe playing basketball, doing all of the things in the context that I think a lot of times when those people who study and study movements and things, they forget that these are human beings. We were human beings. They were human beings attempting to restructure the fundamental inequities that are inherent in this settler colonial system, and those spaces become important. And that's what I think that you are highlighting. And I will be very, very, if you remember anything that if you remember what you wrote in Making of a Black Revolutionary, I would love, and I'm sure our listeners would love to hear maybe a little bit about what were you thinking, and how, what was it in that particular paper that you wrote as you were reflecting about that moment being in Denver.
Well, I think I was probably upset I had to be forced out of, where I lived at. I lived a block and a half from where the shootout occurred with the dope pushers. A block and a half. People would say, "Well, are you crazy?" You just you walk the walk. But I liked the area. Where I grew up. So I was probably it's a combination of what I read, in terms of the autobiography of Malcolm and stuff I read from Boggs, Jimmy Boggs, and stuff I read in The Crusader from Robert Williams, and the anger, you understand, of these jokers, destroying our communities, and having to been forced out with my family. You just and that's what I wrote about in the Making of a Black Revolutionary, because I can remember vaguely. Now this was 51 years or 52 years ago when I wrote it. Those and I remember, I don't know whether I was ending it or uh, near ending it, and I said something about the system of oppression had to go, and it was really it was worded pretty much like that, and had to go was also equating the drugs with the system, and it was more than that. I can't, I've talked about that paper a number of times, and it's been hard to remember, its content. But I'm sure that other papers and documents and a couple of pamphlets that I wrote,
Kind of reflect that,
yeah,
paper. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
build on that. Yeah, build
Yeah.
on.
Yeah, it was very important, to kind of talk about that, because what you really, that's exactly what I wanted to get to, is that there's an intellectual genealogy here, right? So these moments are happening, you're reflecting upon them, but you're also filtering through some of the things that, of course, James and Grace, James Boggs is writing. Um, and Robert F. Williams is writing. You mentioned, the idea of, I'm sure folk will see a clear institutionalization, attempt to institutionalize a lot of the particular activities that you guys were involved in. And you were, of course, involved on some level, to some degree, to a number of institutions. And you talked about the Young African Nation, but you also talked about a little bit of the Republic of New Africa. Could you talk about that relationship, or how the Republic of New Africa is developing, and how this, because of course, in this particular period that you're talking about, there's a strong sense of developing, obviously, a nationalist, revolutionary nationalist, a nationalist agenda, which also leads to the 1972 Gary Convention. Could you talk a little bit about, how these organizations, how you guys are seeing yourselves, again, as a nation within a nation, but also trying to institutionalize that? And you, again, you have the organization that you guys are developing. You mentioned the Black Art. You mentioned that a number of times that I would definitely want to, kind of tease out of our conversation a little bit. But talk about how, this period to give a sense of the folk who are listening, to give a sense, because there are a number of people who write about this stuff, but don't necessarily have a particular connection to it, whether it's a family connection, or those types of things. So there's a lot of the writing and a lot of the a lot of the literature and information that has been coming out is really disassociated from the actual on the ground, the actual things that were happening at that time. So could you talk a little bit about how these groups are formed and how you saw yourselves in relation to all of this nationalist tendencies that were happening at this time?
Well, yeah, my experience, probably the first 7 8 years, 7 years were shaped by the general nationalist orientation. We didn't see ourselves as what has been described as cultural nationalists. Uh, we understood culture, but uh, Mao Zedong in China talked about a cultural revolution to change social relations, to change, to establish the differences between the elite or the so-called bourgeois culture and the culture of the working class or the oppressed. And so many of us, looked at culture in that way. And some of us were probably didn't have, some of us perceived maybe a culture as some form of liberalism or something of that nature at that time. During the period of the 60s and 70s, the relationship between the African People's Party, RAM, the African People's Party, to the Republic of New Africa was such that we were like sister organizations. In fact, RAM elements had begun to build a network, a kind of movement infrastructure, that had members that helped to form the League of Revolutionary Black Workers, the Republic of New Africa, the Black Panther Party. Very early on, the New York Black Panther Party was really formed before the Oakland Black Panther Party. And so RAM really was core to building that kind of infrastructure. Had elements in the Black arts, in the Black studies movement, like John Bracy, that's up at Amherst, wrote several volumes on revolutionary Black nationalism. People like Ernie Allen, who also was at UMass Amherst, but he comes out of California, and he was a member of the League of Revolutionary Black Workers, one of the theoreticians in it. Some of these elements were in RAM that moved to build, but RAM was pretty much underground in terms of its visibility. So it was that kind of a connection there. I remember at the National Black Economic Development Conference in Detroit in '69. I think it might have been in March or something like that. I can't remember '69. Where I met Gaidi. His name was Gaidi. He was Imari Obadali's brother, older brother. They were from Philadelphia originally, and he was a lawyer. Gaidi was a founder of Gold group on African uh, African leadership or African American leadership. He was the one that helped Malcolm. When Malcolm went to Africa. Reverend Cleage out of Detroit. All of them were connected. Boggs was in Detroit. Boggs, they knew each other, but Boggs, had a different kind of an orientation. Uh, Boggs was an auto worker, still writing while he was in the plant. You know, at the Black Economic Development Conference, Imari and the Black Legionnaires. This is when I first met Chokwe. Chokwe was young, and he wasn't a lawyer. He might have just he probably had just joined the Republic of New Africa, because that was I think that was either the same year or maybe the year after the meeting at Aretha Franklin's father's church, where the Republic of New Africa was really founded. And I remember Imari rising to the floor and said that, he was leaving. It was a kind of a split or something that happened at the Economic Development Conference. And he said, we're going home to the South, to the Black nation. And it was, he started moving to Mississippi, and it wasn't long after that, around 71, that the shootout happened in Mississippi, and he got locked up, and some other people got locked up, you know, 71 Mississippi kind of thing. But Gaidi was Gaidi. He they seemed to part ways. Rob was coming back into the country then. Robert Williams was coming back in the country, and they stopped him. I think they stopped him in the UK some kind of way. I think China. I think he was coming back from maybe China or something. Stopped him in the UK, and a number of people was waiting for him at the airport, but he couldn't. He didn't come in. All of this reflected some connections between the nationalist forces. You know, RNA, APP, Ram had Ram in this was around 68. Ram had officially dissolved. Officially dissolved, but your Black Guard emerged. And then the eventually the APP. So I mean, dissolve is just a relative term. So there was that kind of relationship, but there were differences. We had differences. They weren't antagonistic differences. So I mean, with that kind of relationship, that had existed between most of the national kind of organizations that were identified as nationalists and revolutionary nationalists back at that time. I didn't meet Rob until 70. I don't know whether it was 72 or he had got back in the country, or it may have been a little later. I know we met and we were creating a coalition of sorts against I think it was probably against the 76 bicentennial that was in Philadelphia. But he, at that time, was trying to situate himself as he come back into the country, and they still wanted to jail him, and he wanted to go back to Monroe, but he really wasn't able to go back, to his home, to organize and that kind of thing. But it was interesting, to hear from him and to hear about the Operation Dixie radio broadcast that he developed in Cuba. You know that it was, and so you really started to get a sense, of Cuba's role in relationship to the African diaspora. African, and starting with the Black liberation struggle in the U.S. Starting with that. And, I mean, it's a lot of experience. I met Amiri Baraka, Leroy. Well, I first met him in '68. Some members of the Young African Nation, the Guard, we went over to Newark to help campaign and door knocking for Gibson. Kenneth Gibson was the first black mayor of Newark. He lost in the '68 when we were in '68. Lost to '69, I guess, took up, but he eventually won and became the mayor. And it was quite interesting, again, I met him. I was at that what one would say, or how one would be described as, we weren't equals necessarily. He was, more advanced, etc. And I remember at the Gary convention, he would I joked with him. I said, "Damn, you got a whole bunch of Nehru outfits." He was sharp. Every time I would see him, 2 or 3 times a day at the convention, he was changed up. I was kind of communicating between Max Stanford, Muhammad Ahmed, and him, because myself and Queen Mother Moore, who was in the African People's Party, and she has a history, a long history, go back to the Garvey movement. We were trying to get to see if Muhammad Ahmed would be able to speak, and he was in exile anyway. But then we wound up trying to get Queen Mother to speak on behalf, and they put Queen Mother all the way back to the end of the program, and she was, talking about Muhammad Ahmed need for support and this and that, etc. Uh, uh, Amiri and I wound up having a debate that was moderated by a brother who was in the African People's Party, who was in RAM. His name was Askia Muhammad Touré. Askia Touré was a hell of a poet, hell of a poet. Umbra, the different elements. We all lived together in a collective in Philadelphia, and we were order paddle. It was myself, Amiri, and somebody who was from the Nation of Islam at that time. He was from one of the split offs from the Nation of Islam. And so then he looked at me, we looked at each other. It was like, very said, like, well, I guess we equals, you know, he, we was good cat, he had a lot of humor with it, a lot of humor. And he had became a Marxist. By that time, I guess I had became a Marxist, a materialist. I mean, I never called myself a Marxist, and it wasn't because I had any problem with Marxism. I was studying, but I coming out of the nationalist movement, where I was always pushing back against all truths came from white people, you know, and so uh, we would see ourselves as revolutionary nationalist scientific socialists. So we would always call ourselves scientific socialists as opposed to just Marxists at that time. I mean, I don't necessarily have any problem with that now, even though I still would refer to myself, as a scientific socialist, But, we was going at it, and he came to a church that was an allied church of ours, and was a debate, and the uh, the preacher was real close to us, but his deacons, wasn't so close. Was like, wow, why, but he was going to follow the will of the preacher. So they let us in the church, and this deacon was there. He opened the church and this and that. Then Amir, he gets up and he says something. He said Jesus was a revolutionary with a big machine gun, and boy, I tried to look. I tried to look out the side of my eye without looking at the deacon. He was sitting there over there. Like I said, I told him, man, that's boy, you came in and you trying to destroy our base, man. What you he laughed, I said, boy, I said, you a dirty dog, man. You come in and try to destroy our base. I mean, had a big machine gun. And, yeah, he was they didn't put us out, I'm sure he gave a report to the preacher, the preacher probably, I don't know, the preacher, he was a good cat. He probably would have said, hey, man, be careful the next time or something like that, but it was that kind of thing. But yeah, I mean, all of these, you start to grow in the movement, uh, from being an absolute listener. I continue to listen. You got to listen and learn, but being almost an absolute listener to, you know, in awe sometimes of forces, and then later on, really seeing yourself as being a part of a movement, and playing a role, making some sacrifices, running and everything else, and get locked up and those kinds of things. So I mean, it's been an experience, and this toughened me up as I moved to North Carolina, you know, toughened me up. My wife is from here, and when I was in the military, I was foolish enough to become a paratrooper, and it's still, gang orientation. You're gonna follow the crew, but when I was stationed at Fort Braggs, I went in the military. I was making $68 a month. That was my pay. $68 a month. You go in the military now, you're making over $1,000, that kind of thing. But I wanted to get away from there and go someplace. So I come and stay with my mother's sisters here in Rocky Mount, and my wife said I had my uniform on or something. you know, at that time, and the girls, I say that girls because that's what were young, supposedly they were attracted to the uniform,
Mm.
that thing. So I met my wife and, my future wife and, those kind of things. And we went to Philly and stayed up in Philly about 15 years and been down here about 46 years, something like that. I mean, 41 years, 41 years.
That was a very great transition because I wanted to get into the transition from, Philadelphia to North Carolina. I wanted to just kind of back up a little bit. I mean, and this is, I neglected to say this a little bit more about, just the influences and the people that you work with who influenced you, and also vice versa, you influencing them. Um, you mentioned Queen Mother Moore. Could you talk a little bit more about her influence on your trajectory as well?
Oh yeah, yeah. Queen Mother Moore was, she was the leader in the African People's Party. In fact, she had led the formation of a party in '68. All African People's Party for National Liberation. But I met Queen Mother in it was '69, and Muhammad Ahmed was really key to bringing Queen Mother into my life in terms of the movement, and she was something. In fact, I remember we had a central committee meeting right at the house that I'm living in right now. This was my wife's mother's house, and my wife's mother said, "Queen Mother, you can take my bed." So Queen Mother was sleeping in my mother-in-law's bed, and we had meetings, and people came around. Queen Mother, and Queen Mother was probably around 70 something around then, you know, uh, and she was, we would sit around her and she would talk. I remember her, she was serious, but, kind of jokingly. She says, if it wasn't for so many of y'all getting locked up, it wouldn't be no movement because we had these defense campaigns and everything, and see, Queen Mother used to be early on was in the Communist Party, the U.S. Communist Party, and she would tell us stories about, she worked in a kind of a dress factory. She would, put the dresses on, for size and this and that. Was organizing, and she was part of the Garvey movement. When she was born in New Iberia, Louisiana, and she came to New Orleans. Chris Garvey was there to speak. She always tells the story. And, the sheriffs and stuff didn't want Garvey to speak. You know, And so they all came in with weapons, and Garvey said something about they won't let me speak, and said people jumped up and said, "Speak, Garvey, speak," and the sheriff, everything. So it was really a very militant action at that time. But Queen Mother was really she was an inspirer. She was an advisor, and she was a real elder, hell of a public speaker. In fact, she was named Queen Mother in Ghana. I'm not sure whether it was, during the period when Kwame was alive or whether it was at his funeral. I'm not sure. I can't remember. But yeah, they made her Queen Mother. And her sister was closer to Malcolm than she was. Her sister, who was older than she was, I can't remember how much older. She introduced Queen Mother to Malcolm, and Queen Mother really talked to Malcolm about reparations and all that. Malcolm hadn't, because the Nation of Islam wasn't dealing with that at that time. So they had about 250 acres of land in Catskill called Mount Alice Ababa. They named it Mount Alice Ababa. We would go up there, train up there, and have meetings up there. It was, in fact, we had moved Abner Berry, who was a mentor to me, for a while. We brought Abner here to Rocky Mountain. He stayed here with us, you know. But Queen Mother was, she, she was a real, I remember being in a Central Committee meeting in Philadelphia, and comrade and my wife, my partner, came and knocked on the door. I knew something was going on because my father had been really ill. And the brother said, "Your father just died," And I went back in, you know, and they heard it. I said, "Well, my father just died." I said, "But I'll, I'll wait until the our meeting is over." Queen Mother said, "No, you won't. You're going now. You understand? And you're gonna take care of your family, and you got an obligation to do that. We got this. We got that. You're going now." She says, "Some wounds don't heal, so you got to deal with that, you know." And I left. That was the kind of person and relationship the Queen Mother had to us. I mean, she was a fighter, but she was just, this was 75, 1975, and still young, you know, uh, and she, she probably said, "Well, look, certain, you have to know that the movement supports. You could be in something, and sometimes it's our own errors, and sometimes it's an error of misleadership. You understand? To disregard critical moments in your life, to disregard it. Revolutionary. And we were young. And we in 1968. The word was put out that the revolution was going to begin. I could remember a crew of us waiting in a dark storefront inside, all equipped up, waiting for it. Now, Stokely was supposed, no, Rap was supposed to be on the White House steps calling for revolution. And it may have been Bobby or Huey. It may have been Huey. One of them was someplace else supposed to be calling for revolution. So, you as far as we were concerned, this was an urgent. Nothing else mattered. Nothing else mattered. This was it. You know, and sometimes our assessment of the periods that we're in, you know, uh, could be overestimation or assessment, and you don't see nothing but in that, But Queen Mother, she had a grasp, you know. Look, you're gone now, that kind of thing, and somebody else might have said that. I might have tried to say, well, I can handle it, Queen Mother, But she taught us a lot, and she, a lot of. She was very, very close to a number of fighters, many who come out of the old Communist Party movement, but who were, I mean, people like Jesse Gray and James Horton, and all these are elements who were real key. Jesse Gray was the founder of the Harlem Tenants Council early on. All of them had places in Mount Addis Ababa, that they would, go to and that kind of thing. But Queen Mother was quite a influence. In fact, Queen Mother is the one who recruited Abner Berry to the African People's Party, and he became my mentor in Philadelphia. And really, we really became real close. He would drive to Philly from Newark. I'm talking about 3 times a week or more, or the weekend and stay, and he had old volumes of Lenin and stuff from Marx, and he would let me read them and we would discuss them together, and that kind of stuff, But he was one thing about Abner. We brought Abner down here. Abner was 80. He lived till he was 86. He he had a sense of humor about him, but he he would meet with us. His patience was such that one would sometimes think that a person who he had a stroke, then we had to bring him down in a wheelchair, that he would be impatient with mistakes. You understand? Like, well, I ain't got much time left. I can't handle, But he was, we never felt a push, that's been tied to that at all. Never felt a push. I've tried to embrace, that thinking. Haven't been always successful, but I've tried to embrace that thinking. He uh, he became a plaintiff, one of 3 plaintiffs that was in the Black Workers for Justice of a lawsuit here in Rocky Mount, where they had what called an at-large system, which meant that uh, people were not able to elect people from the districts or the wards that they were in, and so Abner and 2 other brothers became plaintiffs. One won the lawsuit, opened up, for there to become a black majority on the city council of Rocky Mount. Now, when the suit was filed, the city council and the newspapers, they came out with stuff saying this Abner Berry, he was a part of the highest ranking committees in the Communist Party, you know, because when they came after Dr. King and they came at the Highlander Center, they said that the Highlander Center was a communist center, and that Dr. King, was being influenced by the Communist Party. If you Google the Highlander, the board, was a big bulletin board like you would see on a highway signs, and they had Dr. King and they had Abner Berry was bending down writing, and that was the thing that they used to try to isolate King and said he was part of the Communist Party. Well, that was Abner. So they came out with all that stuff, and Abner said we called him Baba Sufu, elder teacher. We named him that in 1970, elder teacher, 70, 71 maybe, and he was a smoker. So my children, and I think maybe my granddaughter at that time, one of my granddaughters at that time, Abner said, you light him a cigarette, and they would light him a little cigarette up. They had little cigarette holes because he rolled his. He had one of these cigarette rollers. And it would just had little holes in his shirt from the cigarette. Ashes falling. But Abner said, let him come, let him come. He says, just imagine, you understand, my last fight will be a fight for self-determination. This is this is around the lawsuit stuff. And so when Jackson in '85 was running for president, Jesse Jackson, well, Jackson came to a Rocky Mount because we were involved in a union campaign, and he came to speak, and had what you call it, had these uh these feds, was escorting him, you know, came to this church, this black church. Now you up to some of the racism. This was a union called Act Two, Amalgamated Clothing and Textile Workers Union in the Southern region. And this guy Bruce Rayner, he says he was the president of the Southern region. So we want to bring him here, but we want to try to not get him in some of these black churches. He wanted, boys, So anyway, we said to the well, go find a white church. That was what I said. Go find a white church. So the white workers, they came back, you understand, and they said that their pastors, you understand, said no, they didn't want to have no Jesse Jackson, no black people, that kind of thing. So he came to a black church, Ebenezer Baptist Church. It was packed, and there was some white workers. Probably about 60 white workers came. It was packed. I mean, really packed. This cat Bruce Rayner, who was the president, he didn't feel no whites was gonna come over there. Anyway, Jackson started talking about voting rights, and they brought Abner in a wheelchair up on the stage, lift his arm up. You understand? Congratulating him, for fighting for voting rights. Abner, he was, we were fortunate that he was here. I mean, I could walk. Well, he stayed with us for a while, then got him in a kind of a seniors a kind of hookup. I could walk to it. And he was he was something he used to say to us all the time. He said, "To y'all young people, I could see way, way, way down the road, way down the road." And that kind of thing. But
Uh,
yeah, he was him and Queen Mother. They were great mentors to me and to other comrades.
I definitely was wanted to get into that transition because this is also, of course, Abner Berry and Queen Mother Moore. You're in Philadelphia, right? You're developing, you're working, you're moving, you're developing, a critical consciousness. You're being connected. I also want to ask one quick question. You weren't in Philadelphia when the move bombing happened, were you? I think you were bit down in North Carolina at that particular
Not
point,
the
right?
move bombing, but the first move attack.
Mm,
We were there. In fact, we organized. We organized, and in fact, they had one of these. We call it a horse. This is like a kind of a almost like a blockade. Nothing immovable or anything, but it was something that supposed to prevent you. We knocked that down. Because they were trying to originally. Rizzo has threatened to flood the house, send the fire department in to flood the house. Now we went a delegation. In fact, I was responsible for pulling together a delegation. Father Paul Washington, who was a Church of the Advocate, where the Black Power Conference was at, and the Black Panther Constitutional Convention party that was held there. Father Washington was a brother named Blackwell, who was a city council person at that time. About 5 or 6 of us, and I think Gwen Simmons, Zohara Simmons, might have been. Uh, we went in the house. We went in the Move's house because they were threatening. It was said that there was a dead child in the house, and Move view was, ashes, a natural kind of thing, and so we went up, you understand, to try to, have a talk to find out whether we can get out of this damn thing, without them flooding the house or shooting the house up. And we wound up coming back. It was Delbert and a number of move people were there. We came out, and they were in there for a while, and then when we moved away, then some shooting began. A cop got killed in the 78. This was the 78. That was the move, the 78, move. This was a different location from where the bombing took place. It was still in what they call the Powhatan. This was the Powhatan Village section of Philadelphia, and we had generally a good relationship move at that time. Differences, we had differences, but kind of united front stuff that went down when we were young. We think we had a pretty good a sense of the city and a sense of when they started to move. Fire alarms started to be pulled all over the city, and this was aimed at pulling people back away from it. I don't know who did it, but that's what happened because anybody who had dreadlocks was being snatched out off the street by the police in '78 because they were seen as maybe being a part of this move group, that kind of thing. So
Yeah, I wanted to shift a little bit, if you don't mind, because I know I don't have much time left with you, and also want to respect your time. And there are a number of things that we didn't get to that hopefully we can have another conversation. But we also want to talk about this transition into North Carolina. You mentioned Abner Berry, you mentioned Queen Mother Moore, and you gave a little bit, of who Abner Berry was and how important he was, and formulating your thoughts and the folk that you guys were organizing with. So you moved to North Carolina, and you mentioned the case and the development. You briefly mentioned Black Workers for Justice. Could you talk a little bit more about Black Workers for Justice, its development, but also what it did, and also your organizing in connection with that and other formations in North Carolina around workers?
well, Black Workers for Justice formed in '81, and it formed out of a struggle of Black workers at Kmart. Some women had been fired unjustly and treated unjustly, and so we organized around that. I had just come into Rocky Mount early that year, and my aunt, she had played piano at this church of this young minister at that time. He was about 20, 21 or something. Not he was around 21 when he came to their church. Anyway, I heard that there was going to be a meeting over there for some workers that had been wrongfully fired. A meeting of what they call the Black Ministerial Alliance. So I went in and I listened. I was new. I didn't really know anybody. And these three women, they were being interrogated. Really, are you sure you did what you was told? What about the company policies? Blah 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 blah. I was like, like wow. So I was sitting there, and I said, could I ask the question? The first one minister said, well, who are you? You know, uh, I said who I was, and I said, I'm the nephew of Roxy Freeman. That was the piano player at the church that was being held. So it's like, okay. So Reverend Walker, who was the pastor of the church, said, well, yeah, he's all right. That guy. We hadn't even met each other. So I asked the question. I can't remember exactly, and the sister, yeah, they asked the question, going through this and that. So as it went forward, I said, I wonder if we could meet and then come back to the pastors, the Ministerial Alliance, at another time, and they was in a hurry, you understand, to get it out. But we did, and we talked, we met, listened, and you find out things, at that point, these were three women who the all male preachers, ministerial lines, was like, how credible is this, or probably, a view, how women are, they just complain about anything, that kind of thing. You could sense that, right? So we talked about the issues, and I said, well, are there any other workers who still work at Kmart, who have these issues concerns? Yeah, they brought back probably about 15 other workers, to a meeting, and I think all except for one were women, black women, and uh, they developed demands. I think it was 9 demands, and they named themselves Black Workers for Justice at Kmart. That's what they were called, Black Workers for Justice at Kmart. And we began a struggle. I, having had connections with forces that were tied to the African Liberation Support Movement, and also the National Black United Front that was formed in '79 in New York. Reverend Daughtry was the was chair at that time, and so I went to a United Front meeting in Raleigh, Black United Front meeting in Raleigh, and I saw a few people who had been up in the New York meetings and ALSC, et cetera, and you know talked about Kmart. I think the Kmart worker was with me, and they helped to push it out to some rural counties, et cetera. And we had a boycott, and we weren't able to win the jobs back, but we got the manager fired, and or at least transferred. Some people say he was fired, but somebody else said he was transferred. And uh, we kind of established a movement. We got petitions signed, and most people were knocking on doors or going to their churches. I went to the city and met with some city workers, and I went to a textile plant, was getting petitions signed at these places. And I remember them saying, man, we need something like this here. We got problems here too, and that kind of thing. So anyway, a number of people were reached out to that, and we eventually, I had a founding assembly and dropped Kmart, adopted the program, and became Black Workers for Justice. So we had representatives from around 10 counties, 10 mainly rural counties that was formed, and Abner was very key in helping to figure out how do we now deal with an organization, that was largely in eastern North Carolina, many from the rural areas, and and recognizing that there was a kind of a difference between the rural communities and the urban area. So I mean, these were things that I hadn't considered in terms of the dynamics and those kinds of things. So we learned about that, about the pace of organizing. And North Carolina, had not been a very strong part of concentration during the civil rights period, except uh, maybe Greensboro in terms of the sit-ins, at the Woolworth and that kind of stuff. But Eastern North Carolina, not so much. I mean, you had the NAACP, and you had a little bit of it. A funeral director was supporting the boycott of Woolworth, but it wasn't a Birmingham or wasn't a Montgomery. When I say it didn't have a strong image. However, King had come to a Rocky Mount, and supposedly his "I Had a Dream" speech was first tested out in Rocky Mount, at place OIC, a location that became OIC. It was been a high school, Booker T. Washington High School. Um, but but again, the rural characteristics in terms of organizing and going out in the rural areas, and really seeing the Klan. They were heavily in the rural areas, hearing what people would talk about and those things. So we formed, and then we started very intentionally targeting some workplaces, forming. Some of us became hired by some of the trade union, and there's a whole lot connected to that. We mobilized probably as early as '83 for a demonstration. I think Stevie Wonder was pretty key to that around a holiday for Dr. King. So we had a petition campaign, everything. We mobilized people on buses, to go to DC and participated in that. And so we began to branch out. Then was around the '83 time that we filed, the lawsuit was filed around the voting rights stuff. So there's a whole bunch of, kind of activities, marches, and those kinds of things. So,
No, that your insightful and very important comment about the pace of organizing is very, very important because, of course, you're highlighting a number of things, but it was in the course of time. I don't want to keep you any longer, and I wanted to ask you. I wanted to really get into or ask you about your internationalist worldview and some of the influences for that. But I will defer to you and say, we can have a part two specifically talking about that, the internationalist view that you developed, the worldview, and what was the contributions for that. Or if you feel that you can answer that, in just a few minutes, that will be lovely. So I'll leave it up to you if you're ready. We've been up here for a while, and I don't want to take too much of your time. But if you want to take a stab at that now, or we can
well,
come back and deal with it.
my worldview, it began to probably take shape uh, around 70, 71. Again, the various conferences, the Black Power conferences, and I went to the constant when I got back from my exile. I went to the Black Panther Constitutional Convention in Philly. Was there and learned stuff, met people. And all of those conferences uh, uh, added to at least my thinking about internationalism. My thinking about it. This is connection. And see, Ram had this connection with Rob. He used to get the Crusaders in to Canada, and people would go to Canada and bring them in and circulate them in the U.S. Uh, and uh, uh, and of course, to talk about Malcolm, was to talk about internationalism. In terms of you know a view about internationalism. Rob, was is exiled. He was exiled as a part of internationalism. So you had that. The Going into the '70s with the founding of African Liberation Day Coalition in '72 and the first African Liberation demonstration in '72 was really dealing with the anti-colonial struggle, especially the Portuguese colonies. And so, you start to learn about the international struggle and the relationship of our struggle to the international struggle, because I was always looking internationally from how it relates to our struggle. I wasn't just, looking at it, without a connection. That was important. You start to see members of the African liberation movements who came into the U.S. I went to Lincoln University, a forum at Lincoln that Amilcar Cabral spoke at. And I remember him saying, apologize for my poor English, but I was colonized by the Portuguese. you know, just you know, something simple, but it was profound. In terms of what he was saying. And I remember, oh brother, oh, I forgot his name, but he was very well liked. He was from PAC, for the Pan African Congress in South Africa. Very well liked brother. You know, we really liked him. Can't think of his name. And he came. He was assigned here. Sure, he was in exile, but he was assigned here. You know, and you had forces from the ANC. You had a poet. He just died not too long ago, maybe a year ago. Willie Kosase. He was a hell of a poet. Had been in the States. Most was New York and DC, kind of elements, because it was close to the missions of the liberation mission and those things, So, hearing those speakers being in conferences where they were at and those things, really began to, help me to see that, we were part of what Ram would call the World Black Revolution, and which was our slogan, World Black Revolution, and was able to understand that. So, and that shaped, my internationalism, and I'd already been in the Dominican Republic, and was able to see the contradictions there, where white GIs segregated some of the clubs that we would go to, and boy, it was you wind up fighting, to get in places, in Santo Domingo, and I didn't know, show you just how the U.S., you understand, didn't prepare the GIs. I didn't know that Haiti and the Dominican Republic was on the same island. Just didn't know. And so you don't even know the history. And I've heard some people talk that way about Afghanistan and Iraq, like not knowing the history of the region. Don't So you in there, you're really an invader. You don't give a damn. You're just an invader. But I think that shaped my internationalism, and of course, as I stayed in the movement, for a longer period of time, practical work, and participating in the World Conference Against Racism in South Africa, and dealing with trade unionists in Germany, France, and the UK, all of that, and we organized the International Workers School, Southern International Workers School, where we brought public sector workers from France, Germany, Canada, Senegal, the Dutch, different elements, and then wind up visiting those locations, meeting with workers over there, so you go into in the countries that were the colonial countries, the UK, Germany, which I think Germany might have been in Eritrea or one of these places,
Namibia. Mm-hmm.
Namibia, yeah, that's right, and so, you're learning that. So that was part of my shaping, my early shaping, as I say, was Malcolm and Rob's connection, and seeing liberation fighters like Cabral, and even that's right, Walter Rodney, and listen about about the Caribbean and those things. Some of these were pretty new.
And my goodness, that's a lot. That's a lot there, And again, I'll it's my hope to have you probably feel, I don't know if you feel like you've talked a lot, but there's some things here that I definitely would love to pull on, but I'm not going to do that today.
Right.
I just want to definitely, thank you immensely for taking the time, and I look forward to working with you, and learning from you as we kind of move forward with our other endeavors that we're involved in together as well. And again, I just want to, with that being said, we're just going to put a pin in it, as we say, to take a break for however long we need to take,
Right. Right.
and then we
But
would definitely.
I hope,
Right.
that I feel myself rambling, man, and sometimes I'm, not knowing, whether I'm saying too much about this or just rambling, so I don't
No,
maybe.
there was absolutely no rambling. It was all coherent. Let me just let me tell, but and with somebody such as me who has connections with folk and movements and kind of learned from that firsthand experience. At the same time, I took that and also learned institutionally. Just making these connections are very, very important because you know it was not rambling at all, and that is it was very useful